5 graveyards supposedly haunted by vampires. Number 5. Lafayette Municipal Cemetery, Lafayette, Colorado. For some unknown reason, certain cemetery headstones attract urban legends. In Rhode Island, the headstone of Nellie Vaughan, which reads, "I am waiting and watching for you," garnered enough attention from thrill seekers that they made the dead woman into the undead. Elsewhere, ordinary headstones or ordinary tombstones become the objects of irrational fear. This seems to be the case with poor Theodore Fodor Glava, an immigrant laborer who died of influenza at the young age of 43. A pauper, Glava was given a simple headstone reading Mr. Glava. Even worse, Glava was likely buried in the same coffin right beside John Trantifer, a fellow immigrant doomed to a cramped eternity because of his meager income. Over the years, a legend began to percolate that claimed that Glava was a vampire. Supposedly a native of Transylvania, Glava was believed to have been a tall, thin man with dark hair and abnormally long fingernails. One could search for years and still not find better indicators of vampirism than these. Once realizing that a vampire was in their midst, the good people of north-central Colorado decided to place a spike into Glava's heart. This action not only killed the vampire but also supposedly gave rise to a tree that still stands in the middle of Glava's grave. Nowadays, one is more likely to bump into legend-tripping kids or paranormal investigators than the vampire Glava. Still, one never knows. Number 4. Resurrection Cemetery, Justice, Illinois. Insofar as spiritually active cemeteries go, Resurrection Cemetery in Justice, Illinois, is an all-star. The cemetery is most famous for Resurrection Mary, the ghost girl hitchhiker dressed up for a party who always asks to be dropped off at home. Other ghosts, from floating orbs to full-bodied apparitions that leave handprints behind when they try escape the massive cemetery, are so prevalent that some have taken to calling the cemetery and the surrounding town, which is just a few miles south of Chicago, the Resurrection Triangle, as a nod to the high weirdness of the Bermuda Triangle. Little known or studied is the often repeated story that one of Resurrection Cemetery's many residents is a vampire that can be heard trying to claw its way out of its grave at night. Most paranormal investigators label these scratching and clawing noises the work of a ghost or multiple ghosts, but a curious few seem happy to claim that an unnamed vampire tries to come above ground every night right after sunset. Number 3. Southern Necropolis, Glasgow, Scotland. Located in the Gorbals district of Glasgow, the Southern Necropolis is a mammoth burial site containing over 250,000 tombs. Many famous and well-known figures are buried at the Southern Necropolis, including politician John Robertson, architect Alexander Thomson, and Sir Thomas Lipton, the founder of Lipton Tea. In 1954, the cemetery itself became famous when a police officer named Alex DeProse received a rather strange call. On the night of September 23, DeProse arrived at the Southern Necropolis to see hundreds of children patrolling the cemetery with knives and wooden stakes. They claimed that they were looking for a 2-meter-tall vampire with metal teeth. Apparently, the vampire had already eaten 2 local boys. Soon enough, however, the headmaster of the boys' F-school convinced them that vampires don't exist. Besides, DeProse knew that no murder, let alone a double murder, had occurred in Gorbals for quite some time. Despite this, the boys continued to gossip about the vampire on the playground, which in turn drove many of them to take up their patrol again the next night. They did it a third time, thus concluding a minor panic among Glaswegian children. Oddly enough, the 3-day vampire hunt helped to form an alliance between Christians, the National Union of Teachers, and Scottish communists, all of whom blamed American horror films and comic books for the outbreak. Even odder, over a decade later, London's Highgate Cemetery experienced a similar vampire hunt, except it was adults doing all the patrolling this time instead of children. Number 2. The Erie Cemetery, Erie, Pennsylvania. When your name is Erie, it's hard not to be a little spooky. This once prominent economic hub in northwestern Pennsylvania is no stranger to ghosts. However, according to many, Erie Cemetery hosts its own vampire. Of course, the Erie vampire is buried in what is called the vampire script, an elaborate mausoleum that looks like a series of verses built on top of each other. The crypt looks terrifying, and it has been the catalyst for several strange ghost stories. Many claim that the crypt gives off an unnatural or otherwise oppressive vibe that is unlike the usual uneasiness that most people feel in cemeteries. Others claim that the crypt had been previously burned by superstitious locals, quite possibly the same people who chiseled the name off the mausoleum. Also, two legends concerning the crypt make it clear that its occupant is not resting in peace. In one story, a young man scaled the crypt's walls after agreeing to a dare. Once high up, the young man saw something terrifying and fell. When he woke up in the hospital, he saw the same specter again and fled in terror before accidentally falling to his death. In the other story, a widow visiting her husband's grave was attacked by a pack of feral dogs that seemed to be the guardians of the vampire script. Finally, it has also been claimed that the vampire script and the witch's F-circle, which is a ring of partially burned headstones in the same cemetery, have been the scene of many pagan ceremonies over the years. Who knows, maybe one of these ceremonies brought the vampire to life. That's how it worked in Dracula AD 1972 after all. Number 1. St. Mary's Churchyard, Tarrant-Gunville, Dorset. During the heyday of vampire superstition, it was commonly believed that people who committed suicide were likely to become vampires after death. So when workers in the Dorset village of Tarrant-Gunville exhumed the corpse of old Doggett, a suicide victim buried in the churchyard of St. Mary's, they were understandably petrified. Over 100 years earlier in 1762, old Doggett had killed himself after his employer, Eastbury House owner George Bub Dodington, cottoned on to his financial scheme. In reality, old Doggett was William Doggett, Dodington's steward. Doggett tried to get rich by selling off parts of the Eastbury House while his master was away in Italy. Since his death, stories proclaim that the ghost of Doggett can be seen waiting outside the gates of Eastbury House for a coach driven by a headless driver. Other stories say that Doggett, with a face full of blood, haunts the house itself. Similarly, Doggett's ghost may haunt St. Mary's Churchyard, where his body was put to rest with yellow silk ribbon tied around his legs to prevent him from rising up again.